Welcome to Wildfire Tales, a podcast dedicated to exploring the startup scene in the Midwest. Join us as we dive into unique challenges and opportunities facing entrepreneurs in the region. You'll hear stories of innovative companies and individuals driving growth and creating jobs. So sit back, relax, and get ready to ignite your entrepreneurial spirit. I'm super happy today and excited to introduce you to David Hanna. Dave and I have known each other here for the last 5 or 6 years, and he's got a lot of interesting stories and good experience to really share. His intro and his bio reads, he's a CPA, and it's been a long-term B2B fintech entrepreneur, now a solopreneur as a fractional CFO. He has a lot of experience in the SaaS world and startups, and done a bunch of M&A, mergers and acquisition, has a strong accounting background, as well as this business process development. Dave holds accounting and MBA degrees from the University of South Dakota. He's passionate about sustaining fishing and serves on the board of the Black Hills Fly Fishermen, a nonprofit organization focused on enhancing the Black Hills area fishery habitat. Welcome, David. We're super excited to have you. Thanks for making the time. It seems like we've been talking a lot about your journey and a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today, but maybe just start with a little bit of snapshot of your entrepreneurial journey and kind of how you got to this point today.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thanks, Todd, for having me on this. This is it's kind of weird being interviewed, but as an accountant, nobody talks to accountants. But no, so where I started, I grew up in Parkston, South Dakota, in southeast South Dakota, near Mitchell. And my dad was an accountant. My mom was just one of the hardest working ladies I've ever known and helped take great care of me while Dad was off working. And I've got a brother and a sister. But in Parkston, I had leased the concession stand when I was in high school at the swimming pool. And the concession stand I leased for $5 for the whole summer. That was the rent. They paid utilities and everything. I just gave them $5.
That's a good deal.
Yeah, not bad. But I sold candy bars, Cokes, bags of Funyuns. I probably ate half the Funyun inventory. But I really learned the understanding of revenue, cost of goods sold, and margins in that process because I had no rent to worry about, the $5. And so between that, mowing yards, my parents ran a restaurant when I was in grade school into high school. My dad made me do the payroll for that place when I was 12 years old, believe it or not.
Wow.
So I had my hands in a lot of little things. So that entrepreneurial side of me, I had fits and starts of it from a lot of different angles.
And so how did you end up going from, you did some CPA work and stuff after graduation to owning your own business and then eventually selling it?
Yeah. Well, my dad being an accountant, he had, of course, pushed me a little bit into that side. And that spoke to me more than it did my brother and my sister. And I was his last chance, being the youngest kid. And so math came easy to me. Words didn't.
Yep.
And the typical story with that. And in going through school in Vermilion, I was a terrible student, but I did finish and sold mattresses for a year, which then I became somebody who had a basic understanding of debits and credits and went through legitimate sales training. Which in today's world, it's pretty rare combination, even though I just stumbled into it because I drank too much beer in college and it was the only job I could get.
What about you had a story of working for Disney too that I thought was kind of interesting.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I almost forgot about that. I drove submarines for Captain Nemo. Summer of 1988. I applied. Well, I was Charlie Coyote in college, so I ended up being the mascot. And so I thought, well, shoot, this is so much fun. I should do this in the summer. Disney came to campus to recruit for their college program. I signed up to interview, thought maybe I could be one of the characters at Disney World. Didn't get that job, but I ended up driving submarines, which is pretty much a lawnmower on a railroad track is about all it was.
You glamorize it quite a bit. Is there a picture of proof of that?
Yes, I've got a great one right here for you. We're going to share that. So it's right here on the right. That's me. And that was when I had hair, and that hat still fit.
That's pretty good.
Those pants would not fit me today. I know that much.
That's pretty awesome. You said that was 1988, huh?
1988.
A couple years ago.
Yeah, just a few.
Yeah, that's cool. Thanks for sharing that. When we met 5 or 6 years ago, I remember I didn't know a lot about your background. I know that you were, kind of doing Paystubz, and I, as an entrepreneur and somebody that knew something about SaaS, we started talking a little bit about your business. And one of the things that I walked away from was just being impressed about your knowledge of metrics of the business. And so I'm curious that, like you've already talked about how some of that started, from your dad and pretty young to, getting into accounting and stuff. But I'm just curious about like metrics and how important they were and how it's really kind of driven some of your kind of professional career, because I do think for a lot of entrepreneurs, you were much more detail oriented than probably most people that I see at that stage.
Yeah, no, I would agree. My dad got me started on that, and my mom's graciousness to show me flashcards when I was a little kid made math come easy.
Yeah.
So take that, and then I get into public account. And I always studied clients that did really well and clients that didn't do so well. And I always tried to figure out the why, what made them different. Yeah. And they're all in disparate industries. I was doing tax returns, business valuation work, different services we'd provide to them. And the one common thread I found is the businesses that did best, the business owner always had a deep understanding of their numbers. And it wasn't necessarily from an accountant's perspective, but they understood certain key metrics that drove that business. And so that carried with me. And then I coupled that up with my accounting background when I started Paystubz and realized that, and also subscribed to the adage of you can't manage it if you don't measure it.
Sure.
And that is all too true. But then picking out what's important, that's the trickiest part. Because otherwise you can go broke just measuring things, and you're measuring things that don't put money in the bank.
Yeah, and so maybe just dig in there a little bit further, because I think that's true. I think you see some entrepreneurs that go the other way, where it's like, I'm going to measure everything, and then you're spending a ton of time just measuring stuff, and then of course, are those the right ones? And so when you think about your journey with Paystubz in particular, what was it important when it was like just a handful of you versus what it was at the end? Were there a couple of things that you really focused on early and then basically, managed that pretty effectively? And then over time you added them because you just had more people, more customers, more complexity in the business?
Yeah, at first our measuring wasn't that great. The first few years really, because we were just trying to survive to the next day.
Yeah.
We started in January of 2008. Well, fall of 2008. You think the world's going to end in that financial crisis?
Yeah.
I was like, wow, this is great. I just sold everything I owned and put it all into this. But thankfully, we made it through that. And during those few years, we were burning up a lot of cash relative to ourselves anyway. We were losing $180,000, $90,000 a year for the first few years.
Wow.
And I was hoping $200,000 would get us profitable. It ended up taking us about $750,000 before we got profitable. And I was thinking it'd take 2 years, ended up taking about 6 years.
Wow.
About 5.5. But as we grew, at first I thought every dollar of revenue was a good dollar of revenue. Yeah. But then I suddenly started to learn that no, some dollars of revenue come easier than others, which you always know. Yeah. But in the early throes of things, we were just trying to get clients, and serve them well. Yeah. But then it wasn't until after a few years I thought, okay, what really are our margins, and what's it going to cost us if we add on this one other service inside the software, and how much time is that going to take? What's that labor cost going to be? And by labor cost, one of the things I actually made this mistake, which seems weird admitting it. But I did not include our employee benefits and payroll taxes. I was just doing things off gross wages. Yep. And I knew better until I started analyzing the numbers at probably 1 a.m. And I realized, oh, well, no wonder. Yeah. And I thought the numbers looked too good. Well, it was because I had a cost underestimated. Sure. And that was another 25% added onto that labor cost because I didn't have it accounted for properly.
So what would you say, like, as you've kind of gone through this evolution from like small to like figuring out, all of this and the value of revenue and making sure you understand all your costs, was there anything that was like the most important metric, or was this one the kind of aha moment in hindsight, or was there something else?
One of the biggest key metrics I studied, and I compared this to, say, Paychex. Paychex and ADP are publicly traded behemoths in the space we used to be in. And I actually invested in Paychex during the 90s. And one of the goofy metrics I stumbled upon was their average revenue per employee. And this was in the mid 90s. I remember they were generating about $120,000 in revenue per employee.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, wow, their average wage can't be but 40,000 at that time.
Yep.
And I was like, holy cow, that is a better margin than a CPA firm generates.
Yep.
And that's what made me end up getting into that business. So average revenue per employee, and then actually calculating that margin or the margin between your revenue minus fully accounted for labor costs.
Yep.
Employer payroll taxes, employer paid benefits, but then also your direct variable costs. For us being a software reseller, I had to include the costs that we paid to Kronos or UKG at the time.
Yep.
And we were paying them when we finished up over $300,000 a year. So I had to make sure that was included. The costs we paid to Wells Fargo Treasury Management for running ACH payments to people, all those perfectly variable costs. And what I mean by that, for those that aren't nerdy accountants, is for every additional dollar in revenue, you incur an additional cost of, say, 20 cents or 10 cents or whatever it is. But knowing those perfectly variable costs were really important. And then also to establish that margin. And then analyzing that and looking for anomalies over a period of time. But those were the metrics that I studied feverishly.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. And I think it's I just don't think every entrepreneur or CEO gets to that level that early. So I think that's good. Maybe my next question, though, kind of is a dovetail to that. I think when you start thinking of things that way, it creates a culture. And to start with, the culture is you, right? I mean, when you're first starting out and you're hiring people, and the specificity of costs and understanding your margins and service to the customer, those are derivatives of your personality and kind of what you're building. Maybe talk to me a little bit about that, like attention to detail, your customer focused, your value from your employee in the margin you were trying to get. Like, how did that all kind of work from you doing it to your start by yourself to having a staff that you're hiring and looking for?
First off was always the service end, because I knew that if we didn't control the software, we didn't develop and sell it.
Yeah.
We couldn't really control the feature set that we were selling. Even though we thought we had a great piece of software that could compete against the national providers, the only thing we had left to differentiate ourselves was service.
Yeah.
And so as easily as I said that right there, I would talk to our people about that constantly and saying, that's what we have. That's what we have to sell is us.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means answering the phone as a human. That means returning phone calls timely. That means returning emails timely. And I would just constantly harp on that and probably drove them half crazy sometimes. But that started to embed in everybody. And when we hired somebody new, I would start to hear other employees talking to that new person about, these are the expectations of how we serve our people. And so that did slowly grow between all of our people. And then on the numbers side, we spoke of that as well at quarterly and annual meetings.
Another thing that I think is kind of counterintuitive in your business, I think when I talked with you, it was just the pace of growth. I knew you wanted to get, cash flow positive. You'd already been when I talked to you, but you weren't like hell bent on like throwing gasoline on this business and just accelerating it. And so you had kind of a different strategy to it, both from customer acquisition, differentiation from your offerings. It was service based, and so maybe talk to me a little bit about like, was that a function of just you didn't have a strong background in sales from a software perspective, or was it more deliberate? Anything in hindsight that you maybe would have done differently, or do you think it worked out really well given kind of the constraints you had?
Yeah, I think it was a function of not that deep a background in the software sales for myself. Well, I had zero when we first started. and that coupled with, we were so particular about service side, because I knew how long our sales cycle, it took between 1 and 7 or 8 months to close a sale. From somebody says, yes, I'm interested, and they're talking to you on the phone or you're in person, to closing the deal.
Yeah.
And so it was a fairly long, like most software sales, B2B software sales, it takes a little while. When I realized how much time was invested on that, I wanted to make darn sure we kept the client.
Right.
And so that's when service became really even more important. And I realized how valuable that client was. and the life cycle of that client. And I never really got deep into the CACs and life cycle value of a client. I always had my own estimate because I always figured that client was worth probably somewhere around 2 times their annual revenue in our industry.
Yep.
And so I looked at that part that way, but then during that sales process, I would talk to that client and remind them that they can leave at any time. We didn't tie them to us. And so our clients became so loyal to us, I realized I didn't have to work for the sale.
Right.
They would refer people to us.
Yeah, that's great.
And I saw other groups our size go put a bunch of sales effort in, but then I saw their service suffer. And they had so much churn over on that side.
Yeah.
And so it's always that balancing act. How fast do you want to push that? How much churn are you willing to live with? Because the faster you push there on the sales, you're going to have some churn probably. Yep. Unless you have exceptional management on both sides of that.
Yeah.
And as we all know, that's hard to do.
Yeah, there's no question about it.
Yeah. And plus raising the money to develop a good sales process and practice. I thought, well, shoot, I need a sales manager because I was obviously bad at managing a salesperson. And so I thought, do I want to manage that? Or do I want to just manage a service and let those people do a great job? And I'll go service the leads when we get the nice warm leads that are easy to close.
Yeah. And so I think you played with the cards you had and you played to the strengths you had. And so, and I guess the next kind of transition is this led to an outcome of selling your business. And so I think, that's what all entrepreneurs want to hear, right? They put in all this time and effort, and at some point in time, there's a financial reward to doing it. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about just that transition from, were you interested in selling? Were there conditions that were changing in the business environment that drove you to kind of look for an exit? Like, how did that actually come from, I'm running my business, to someday you decide, okay, it's time to do something different?
Yeah, well, I'm guessing anybody who's walked that path of starting a business, once you're a couple years in, you're thinking, I'm just going to sell this thing because I don't want to do it anymore.
Forever.
Because you have those nights you drive home, you're like, what have I done to myself? Which trailer court should I move into? All those kinds of conversations. But after 14 years of doing it, and during that last 6 years or so, there were times you have a long day and you think, oh, maybe it's time. Nah, it's not time. No, I still see too much horizon out in front of us. And our employees had been with us a long time. They're really good, wonderful people. And so I was reluctant to do that because I thought I wanted to help create opportunity for them with the business. So I was like, do I start to deliver pieces of equity to them? Or do I sell it and try to sell to a buyer that takes good care of them?
For people.
Want to go. Yeah. So with a smaller group, you get that emotional side of that.
Yeah.
And so that made things tough. But then COVID showed up and everybody wanted to work from home. And wanted to continue working from home, where I started turning into the angry old guy in the office, just going, I'm here in the office. I can manage in 3 dimensions. I don't manage in 2 dimensions. Mm-hmm. And the more I realized that was becoming a reality, I thought, boy, I don't really want to do this right now, but I think it's time.
Yeah.
And there were a few groups I'd met at national conferences over the years, and business owners are always talking. Mm-hmm. So you're going to get out, you're going to transition to new owners. What are you going to do? I mean, those conversations they happened often. And I'd get a phone call once a month from a private equity group here and there that was rounding up groups like us. And finally, one day I thought, it's time.
Yeah, I'm going to return that call.
Yeah. And so I ended up with a few options and worked with it. And ended up working through that process over a 9-month window.
So was it difficult? I mean, it sounded like you had multiple suitors, which is helpful. Mm-hmm. And, so valuation and some of the, you had a pretty good handle on these key metrics. Did they feel like the acquiring company kind of appreciated what you had built and kind of looked at the business the same way? Did they have as much rigor as you did? And obviously you ended up at a place where you felt like the valuation was fair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that part actually came pretty easily. And then I thought, well, shoot, maybe we left money on the table. But I mean, you'll never know.
Yeah, never know.
Yeah, so you learn to get used to it. But I'm still happy with, even over a year out, I'm still happy with that side of it. The due diligence side of them looking at us They were impressed with our profit margins, our people, and our level of service. Some of those metrics we were talking about earlier is a net promoter score.
Yeah.
I started looking at that closely, and through the HubSpot Service Hub is what we used. Zendesk, same one and the same, so to say.
Yeah.
But we looked at those more immediate CSAT scores and started watching those by person. And that started opening up a whole new line of metrics I never got that deep into. But the buyers were obviously really liked our people and our cash flow. And our client base was really good.
Yeah.
We were very diversified in our client base. If there's about the only thing I'd do all over again is do more homework on the parity between the buyer's perspective on staff and what they can do, as well as their perspective on the service end. Because the people that bought us, their approach to the servicing end was different than ours, and to a point to where I think that happens a lot in those transactions, but I wasn't really happy with some of the outcomes there.
Do you think they diluted the value of the business they bought because are you insinuating that like service went backwards, or they just had a different approach?
Probably somewhat, from what I've heard. I'm not certain of that, but I haven't been around it since May of last year. But from what I understand, it seems like that could be the case.
Yeah.
I can't say I don't think it's been terrible for those clients that needed a stronger hand to hold them. And for us, we probably overserved in some situations because I couldn't stomach the thought of somebody speaking poorly about our service.
Yep.
And I think there needs to be a level of comfort that, well, we can't spend that much money serving that one client.
Right.
And they've got to learn to figure things out on their own. And then we had some of those clients that we held their hand too much.
Yeah.
And
it makes sense. You value all of them, that's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So David, you've had an amazing career and done a lot of different things. If you could go back to your 20-year-old self, and I think a lot of the people that I work with, from an entrepreneur standpoint, are relatively young. What would be 3 items that you would go back and tell your 20-year-old self based on all these kind of lessons learned?
One of them, I don't think I'd written down earlier when we were talking, and I just thought of, is I would have started that business at the age of 30 instead of 40.
Yeah.
Because I got to the age of 40 and realized, dang it, I don't want to be 50. Wished I did it at 40, so I'd better start now. But I did, honestly, that 30 to 40-year-old range, for whatever reason, I didn't seem to have the confidence that I could go do that.
Yeah.
And so I had a great experience helping a family build a hotel management company after I left public accounting. And that gave me the confidence where I was like, well, shoot, yeah, I can do this. Yeah. Yeah. And so that would be, don't wait too long, but get a good foundation of experience. Okay. And that's dependent on the field of study. That's a little different for everybody. One of the other ones is realize that as humans, we all lie to ourselves. We always think we're probably better at some things than we are, and find that person that'll call you out on it, and have the moxie to listen to them, even though it's hard to do sometimes.
Yeah.
Especially early on in an idea, because there were so many early decisions in those first 2 years that took us down a path so far that it was tough to reel that back in and go down the path that we didn't choose. That'll help a person, I think, choose more wisely when you're making key software decisions, key service billing related decisions. What's your billing model, revenue model going to be?
Sure.
Because once that toothpaste is out of the tube, some of it's really hard to put back in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's one other item here. I'm going to find it here real quick because I thought it was important. Oh, shoot. Most important piece on the accounting end. Just make sure you at least track your cash in, cash out. On the front end, go ahead and keep it simple, but make sure it's something that can scale later.
Sure.
And don't be afraid to ask for help. And there's nothing wrong with outsourcing certain things. And hopefully you got the capital to do that.
Yeah. No, I think those are good. That's good. I appreciate you having that reflection and kind of thinking about through that. The next kind of one that I had on this was talking about why rapid. We've both of us have participated in this kind of innovation district and trying to build and retain more of our students, whether it's the School of Mines or others, and keep them in state and really get them employed. really diversify away from having all these service jobs or ag jobs and having something else like technology. You've been on the forefront of that for a while, and you've kind of seen this evolution of, starting pretty tough, in an environment that maybe wasn't as kind. And hopefully over those years that you've been doing Paystubz and that stuff, it's gotten easier. I'm curious about why be here? And you think it's a good place to continue to build out businesses?
First off, the why. In 1999, I chased an old girlfriend to Denver from here.
Okay.
And she's still there. I came back. So that worked out pretty well, in my opinion.
Yep.
And, but after I was in Denver for a while, one of the reasons I came back here is because if I wanted to go do something in Denver, and this is 1999 Denver, 2000 Denver, so it's 22 years ago.
Yeah.
I had to travel 30 to 60 minutes to go see a friend or to go do something out in the mountains. And then you had another million people wanting to go do the same thing you did.
Yeah.
So it's really tough to find space. I contrast that with today, about 2 hours before we got on this Zoom call, I ran home west of town, about 10 miles, grabbed the dog, went out to a Forest Service road, went for a quick 2-mile little loop on a Forest Service trail, never saw
anybody.
Drove back into town, grabbed a quick bite to eat, came back to the office.
Yeah.
And there aren't too many places in the world where you can get away with doing that.
Yeah.
And it's 60 degrees up in the hills right now in the middle of February.
Pretty nice. Yeah.
So it's a gorgeous day. So that by itself is wonderful.
Quality of life.
Yes. Yeah. And then on the human side, one thing, I grew up in eastern South Dakota, went to Houston, Texas, went back to South Dakota, came to this side of the state, went to Denver, came back. And then I was in Orlando there at Disney World for a summer. But in those places I've been, everywhere else compared to here, there's very little pretentiousness here. And one of the things I like the most is you are who you are here. Just don't hurt me, don't hurt my family, don't take my stuff, and you're perfectly okay in society.
Yep.
And that's it. It's a kind of a live and let live mentality out here, and I absolutely love that about this place compared to other places where I've been.
Yeah, that's
and
good.
Then you contrast that with all the money getting poured into Elevate Rapid City, and that the devotion and care in trying to bring more economic opportunity here that is not in the tourism trades. Tourism's important, but we're trying to get into trades and services and businesses that are not are not government, that are not healthcare. Those are kind of our three pillars of our community.
Yep.
So we've got all this intellectual capital at the School of Mines that we're fighting to retain and grow that here. And I'm seeing more green shoots today than I've ever seen before in all those areas.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's going to be the next 5 to 10 years are really going to be something around here.
Yeah, I agree. And so it's good to hear you say it, and say it with a little bit different perspective too. And so that's exciting, and it's exciting to be part of it, right? I mean, as we all play a role.
Yeah.
Well, good. I just have 2 more questions for you. One of them is kind of going back to your intro and just talking about your love of fly fishing. I'm kind of curious about just, that as a hobby. It sounds like it's something that you've been doing for a number of years. Is there any corollary to how this benefits your business? Is it just something that gets you away from thinking about it and brings you back fresh to work? Is there something more to it? Is there something more to the craft that ties to kind of business, or is it just a passion for you?
Yeah, it doesn't really do much for business other than it's a hobby.
Yep.
The one thing I've found most interesting to me is I never knew what a fly was, other than I'm thinking of how it's fly. When I first moved out here, a friend of mine convinced me to buy a fly rod. And I said, nah, I'm not going to be one of those uppity tweed hat wearing people. And he convinced me to do it. He takes me out fishing once. He said, what'd you think of that? I said, I kind of like that. I like the variables involved in the fishing side of it. And he goes, well, good, because I won't fish with you for a year. And I was like, what? You get me to spend this money now, you won't fish with me. And he said, nah, the new people in the sport drive me crazy. And that was 1995. Well, fast forward till now, I have 2 boats, one with a motor, one without, one for drifting rivers. I have, I think, 11 or 12 fly rods. And I fish a lot.
Yeah.
But it isn't so much the fishing as I've gotten older and found, because at first you want to catch every fish available. If there's a fish there, you want to catch it. But all of a sudden you look back at the different trips I've been able to go on, the people I've met, the places I've been. That's far more important than the actual fishing itself. The fishing is almost second or third in line. And also the part of the fishing side, from a cerebral or intellectual standpoint, is the volume of variables involved in throwing a fly rod properly and catching fish on a fly rod versus spinning gear. Because I grew up with spinning gear and I switched to the fly rod. And I still own spinning gear and still throw it sometimes. But the fly rod adds a number of variables to the activity that nothing else does.
Yeah.
But it's another type of hobby. And I've said it to my sister, said it to my brother, that I actually feel sorry for people that don't have good hobbies.
Yeah.
Whether it's knitting or fishing, but if it's that one thing that removes your mind from the rest of the world and the rest of the world ceases to exist, that's a wonderful hobby.
Kind of wrapping this up, we've been creating this kind of tradition about asking what the kindest thing anyone's ever done for you. I think it's important to remember the humanity of kind of what we do, and it's all people. And I think it's important to realize all the people that helped us get here. We didn't do it on our own, that's for sure. And so I'm just curious on from your standpoint, David, what's the kindest thing anybody's ever done for you?
I'm glad you asked me that before this, because it made me finally remember a story. My dad, when he was doing some traveling and audit work, I was in high school. I was about 15. So we were down in New Mexico, and he was going to be working all day. So he dropped me off at a golf course. I think it was on the edge of the air base down there. And I go walking into the clubhouse. At the time, I was starting to play some pretty decent golf. And I go up to the counter. It was $8, I think, for 18 holes in a cart, whatever it was. This is 1981, 2, something like that. And I reached in my pocket. I didn't have enough money. And I go, "Sir, I'm sorry, I don't have enough money." And I was just going to turn around. I thought, well, shoot, I'll just chip and putt all day and wait for Dad. And I turned around, this little bit older gentleman behind me goes, "You out of money?" And I said, "Oh, it's okay. I just don't have enough." He goes, "No." And he hollers at the guy behind him. He goes, "I'll take care of his green fees. You can play with me." And I said, "Well, as soon as my dad gets here, I'll get the money and pay you back." He goes, No. Don't worry about that. Because you get a chance to do something nice for somebody another day, you do it. Then you paid me back. So that was my very first lesson on paying it forward.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. It's a good reminder, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. Yeah. So,
good.
He's a good guy.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So I'll just wrap this up. David, I really appreciate you spending the time and telling some of these stories. I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned in kind of your journey, and really just appreciate you taking the time to share. As we've kind of talked about, there's a lot of entrepreneurs that can learn from maybe some of the mistakes and some of the things that we've done in the past. And I think if we can just do something to like minimize, don't make the same mistakes I made, you're going to end up making some different ones and just keep you between the rails. And so I think your story and giving us some of the examples and stuff really does help illustrate that point. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no, I certainly hope so. Yeah, because you never do it by yourself. I know that.
Nope, you don't. So
thank you.
Yep. Okay, thanks for joining Wildfire Tales. We hope you enjoyed this episode, learned something new about entrepreneurship and creating your next startup. Don't forget to subscribe so you never missed an episode. Follow us on social media to stay up to date on all things Wildfire Labs. Until next time, keep your entrepreneurial fire burning bright.